Hello, everybody, and welcome back to A Deck of All Jacks, the podcast where I interview people about what they're passionate about. Remember, nobody was meant to be a jack of all trades, but rather we're supposed to rely on the people around us to be a deck full of jacks, each one a jack of maybe a couple trades at best. I'm your host, Peter, and I have today with me my friend Tanner. Say hi, Tanner.
Hi.
Where are you calling in from, Tanner?
I am in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Lovely, and how do we know each other?
We went to school together. We also lived together
Yep.
when we were at Dartmouth, and yeah, it was a blast.
And then since we graduated from Dartmouth, I kind of headed back to Arizona, and then you went to Virginia. Tell us a little bit about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, it was. Uh, I came to Virginia to do a professional development program at a church
Hmm.
here. It was kind of a lot of things lined up simultaneously, a bit of a divine appointment in a way.
Yeah,
But my brother lives in Charlottesville still, and my sister's living here right now. So it's been a fun time to be all together.
that's lovely. And what do you do right now for work?
I work at a biomedical nonprofit. I do science communications, so I help make the complicated biology stuff make sense to people.
That sounds delightful and also rewarding and fun.
Oh, yeah, I enjoy it.
I have with me many different topics for us to talk about today, kind of a variety, very interesting. The first one, and this is the one I was really pushing for. Just as a brief introduction, Tanner and I are both of the Christian faith, and we have a lot to say about theology and how it applies to life. And so the first topic that Tanner suggested that I wanted to talk about was the Supper of the Lamb and why cocktail parties are bad. And I have no clue what Tanner's going to say here, so I'm very excited to learn more, Tanner, whenever you're ready.
Yes. So in part, what I mean by the Supper of the Lamb is a reference to this idea of the marriage feast of the Lamb, which is presented in the book of Revelation
Mm-hmm.
as sort of um, the beginning of the rest of eternity is inaugurated with this great marriage feast where heaven and earth are sort of um, remarried, brought close together while God
Yeah.
joins with his people. It's also a specific reference to the title of this book, which is called The Supper of the Lamb, a culinary reflection by Robert Farrar Capone.
Well,
This is one of my favorite books. It is a very weird book in that it's equal parts cookbook and like philosophical theological treatise.
that's very unique.
Um, yeah, it's weird. It is a weird book. It veers back and forth between like the overarching story of the book is him explaining essentially how to cook lamb in four different ways,
Oh,
and
well.
yet he frequently goes on these crazy wild tangents with like some of the most incredible like teachings and insights on life and
Mm-hmm.
just like the goodness of embodiment and human existence that I really really enjoy. And he definitely feels like a almost a grandfatherly figure with some really like hot takes and
Yeah.
stuff like that in a way that I find incredibly charming and compelling.
Okay. So, like, what's like an example recipe? Is it just like lamb stew or?
Yeah, yeah. Lamb stew is one of them, and he kind of peppers things in throughout. But truthfully, like I feel like the recipes and such are a bonus and almost in
Okay.
some ways tangential to the like heart of the book.
Okay.
Um, it is a weird, delightful read. The second in the second chapter, he sort of recommends the reader take an onion and spend about an hour sort of like slowly and meditatively like chopping the onion and like considering like the goodness of creation through
Wow.
the meditation on the onion.
Yeah.
um which it's like I said, it's weird. I have done that before with a pomegranate. I
Okay.
have meditatively cracked open a
Yeah.
pomegranate and removed the seeds to prepare for a tea time that I was holding.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a really lovely and sort of peaceful time, and it's deeply grounding and centering and embodied in a way that I really love.
Yeah, I believe pomegranates show up plenty in scripture as well.
It's
And
true.
when it comes to like the wedding feast and marriages, for a bit of context for our listeners and watchers, in first century Jewish culture, where the New Testament Christianity comes out of, wedding feasts, like the basically the wedding reception, were a very very big deal. These are days upon days of endeavors. We have that a little bit in today's culture, where like you'll have a reception that's like kind of long by our standards, but that's only a few hours. These are a few days, and it seems to be essentially the biggest part of the wedding is this kind of wedding feast that you have. And so when Scripture talks about heaven and earth being reunited and man being reunited with God at the end of all time, there's this like analogy of marriage, of the bridegroom Christ coming to get his bride for us to be united with him again, and then because of this kind of marital symbology, you have this like reference to the wedding feast, that like heaven will be this great banquet with us rejoicing with our bridegroom Christ and everything. And he seems to, in this book, Tanner, reflect a lot on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the book focuses on um, the ways in which that sort of end of time, beginning of eternity period is sort of reflected back and echoed back into our everyday life,
Okay.
just through the goodness of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, yeah, something that I think is really important. And even um, sort of regardless, just in today's modern world, I think there's a lot of sort of disembodiment
Mm-hmm.
in terms of just our digital lives, the extent to which we spend time and are engaged online, but then
Yeah.
also just even, Christian teachings, evangelical teachings that sort of really move people's focus away from their embodied self. I've, growing up, I definitely heard teaching of like, oh, I can't wait to, die and go away to heaven, and,
Yeah.
then I won't have this awful body anymore and stuff like that. We should look forward to leaving behind our flesh so that we can we should focus on the spiritual instead of the flesh. And there are senses in which that's true, but I think it's taken in a way that is harmful,
Mm-hmm.
because we were created as embodied creatures,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. And ultimately God believes it's a good thing, within the Christian faith, in that God himself became embodied in
Yeah.
the man of Jesus Christ, the fully God and fully man.
Yeah.
And,
By
and even
lowering
that
him.
is that marriage, right? The
Yeah.
marriage of the divine with the human.
Yeah. It's one flesh, and by stooping down into our level, he dignified humanity. And
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely grew up with a lot of that too. I think a lot of this kind of denigration of the body by evangelical culture, I think it comes from a pretty good place of like Paul does talk down on the flesh a lot. I mean, and he does so fairly, but he also
Mhm.
teaches, as especially in First Corinthians, as has the church for millennia, that our bodies will be raised in the last day, and that we
Yes.
will be rejoined with our bodies, right?
Yeah, our
So,
goal is not to escape our bodies.
no,
And when he's talking about flesh, um, I think he's speaking in a different sense in
yeah,
terms of our destructive desires.
mm-hmm,
Um, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
I
Um,
can I can detail a little bit about what I mean of why cocktail parties are bad,
yes, let's move into
um,
that.
with an excerpt from the Supper of the Lamb,
Okay.
um, where in a later chapter he kind of goes off on cocktail parties and why he's so very opposed to them. Um, so he says, I am as aware as you are that the large cocktail party is the accepted American style of having company. I will say, I believe he wrote this in the 70s.
Sure.
So he is writing to a bit of a different age, but I find a lot of what he says to be quite timeless.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I choose to swim against the current. I find hard liquor and goodies from 5 to 8 p.m. to be inhuman, unmerciful, and frustrating. It is inhuman because, as commonly practiced, it is impersonal. The only time a man's name counts at a cocktail party is 3 weeks before the event when it is scrawled on an envelope containing usually a coy commercial invitation. From the moment he enters the door, however, he is reduced to a mere member of the crowd. Um, Most people are continually on the move at such affairs. You know the experience well. You are constantly under the impression that the interesting conversations are going on somewhere else, and you spend 3 hours trying vainly to get where the action is. The secret, of course, is that there usually isn't any. When there is, it is entirely accidental to the occasion. Somebody just happened to bring it in with him. Furthermore, the perpetual motion at cocktail parties, their failure to provide each person with an assigned and proper place, effectively prevents the company from becoming a company at all. Besides being inhuman, however, the exercise is unmerciful. Too much liquor too fast is only the half of it. What is just as bad is having to wander around like a lost soul while people spill drinks down your back and wipe dips on your front. We are homeless enough without having to come in out of the cold to nothing better than a warm exile followed by a cleaner's bill. Finally, cocktail parties are frustrating. I used to come away from cocktail parties with a vague sense of guilt at having somehow missed what others apparently found. But I do so no more. Nobody finds it. The fault here, dear Brutus, is not in ourselves, but in the system. And I'm pulling bits. I'm skipping over bits.
Yeah.
He then goes on to offer his what he sees as the virtuous alternative to this vicious spectacle,
Yeah.
which is the dinner party.
Mm.
A dinner party is an honest attempt to create a company, not a crowd. Persons matter at the table. We sit in real and estimable places marked with the most precious and intimate device we have, our names. Um, the host, you see, has been willing to take me on as God takes me on, as a risk. By inviting a specific few number of people, you are in your own way as the host vouching for those people.
Yeah.
And if you have 6 people over for dinner and one of them is just really bumming the table out or making things very awkward, again, each guest is taken on as a risk, whereas at
Yeah.
that cocktail party, it's much more impersonal and just siloed off. Um, let's see. I think I can certainly go on. He says that the sit-down dinner is merciful, where the cocktail party is not. It provides us with better food, more attractive service, and beneath it all, a seat to sit on. He talks a lot in this book about place,
Yeah.
sort of belonging in a space, a place of real beings. A lot of his stuff really does, even though he's writing pre-internet, it rings very true. And he talks about just depictions of heaven as the celestial banquet, the
Yeah.
supper of eternal life. And in that dinner party, it's a foretaste of what is in store for us. And he says, lastly, that the dinner party is a true proclamation of the abundance of being, a rebuke to the thrifty little idolatries by which we lose sight of the lavish hand that made us.
Hmm.
It is precisely because no one needs soup, fish, meat, salad, cheese, and dessert at one meal that we so badly need to sit down to them from time to time. It was largesse that made us all. We were not created to fast forever. The unnecessary is the taproot of our being and the last key to the door of delight. Enter here, therefore, as a sovereign remedy for the narrowness of our minds and the stinginess of our souls. The formal dinner for 6, 8, or 10 chosen guests, the true convivium, the long session that brings us nearly home. Yeah, I know that's a lot sort of all at once, but I think provides a decent taste of just why I love this book.
That's really beautiful. Are you familiar with Charles Taylor's critiques on modernity?
I'm not.
So Charles Taylor is this Canadian philosopher who really sat down in his book A Secular Age and tried to figure out what was the fundamental shift in the kind of like Euro-American mind from like medieval times up into modernity, right? And he labels a few things. So like the medieval world is a lot more enchanted, whereas we live in a very
Mhm.
disenchanted, materialistic world.
Yeah.
But he also talks a lot about the atomization of society.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if you look at like the medievals, their kind of metaphor that would work for how they saw society to function would be more of like a body, where like you have your
Mhm.
place in the body. This is your function. This is who you're next to. Like if you're an arm, you're gonna be next to the shoulder, etc., etc. The king is the head, stuff like this. And so you have your function, you have your place at the table, and that's you're kind of stuck next to who you are. And that is more analogous to what Paul says in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And you, with Charles Taylor, he says that in our modern society, we see ourselves kind of like as free flowing atoms, almost like
Mhm.
as in a gaseous sort of compound, where we're each an individual atom. So we're first off, we're all equal. So we're all like equally oxygen or equally nitrogen. There's no hierarchy. We're all just completely the same in that sense. And then we're very
Mhm.
free flowing, so we can kind of go wherever we want, individualistic. If I don't like this person, I can kind of just like go away from them and bump into another atom. And so it seems like the dinner table is the body, and that the cocktail party is the gaseous compound, where I can just like
Absolutely.
free float around, talk to who I want to. If I don't want to talk to this person, I can just move along,
Right.
which sounds great because of liberty and all these things, but also it leaves people marginalized and it lacks accountability and that personalness, that you are forced to have at the dinner party, right?
Yeah. I mean, the cost of that body, of that dinner party, of that coming together is discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, the cocktail party, in its sort of anonymity, that
Yeah.
atomization, um, is yeah, it's less personal. So you are able to skirt around the discomfort of having taken the risk of sitting down with a chosen few people
Yeah.
who may or may not be to your liking. Yeah, that's a really cool connection.
Yeah, and Jesus didn't have a cocktail party. He made the tax collector sit next to the political radical, and he had the fishermen sit next to other fishermen that they weren't fond of. But
Absolutely.
let's transition. Speaking of beauty and society and the faith, you also had as a topic bad Christian art and media
Mhm.
literacy. Tell us a bit
Mhm.
more about that, Tanner.
Yeah. So growing up in sort of the evangelical, non-denominational sort of circles that
Mm-hmm.
I did, I grew up with a lot of different sort of Christian bookstore type movies and things like that.
Yeah.
And sort of at the same time, from my parents and people around me, this um, sort of belief in like all that secular media, that very those evil movies, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I've come to realize that it reflects something kind of sad within that particular culture, is that I've noticed this pattern that if a movie, for example, depicts something difficult, like say somebody dealing with drug addiction or something like that,
Yeah.
or yeah, making poor life decisions just in general, whatever that may be, um, I've run into sort of time and time again this attitude that says if this movie is depicting that, then the movie is promoting those choices and
Yeah.
those actions. And certainly I'm not saying just forget you know depict anything.
Sure.
There's a middle ground to be had here, but um, that was that was a an eye-opening thing to realize that um, within some of these Christian circles, there's this belief that if a piece of media depicts something, then it is, depicts a character that's morally gray or even
Yeah.
evil, then that piece of media is advocating for the belief of that character, which is just that's not how art works. So much of the great art, the literary classics, good movies, things like that, deal in a lot of painful things, poor decisions, morally gray characters.
Yeah.
And um, I think that honestly does connect back to what we were talking about the willingness for that discomfort
Yeah.
and the tension and sitting in that. And if a Christian is completely unwilling to um to sit and consider something morally gray that is just really difficult, um I think that's sad. And I think that you're going to miss out on a lot of the beauty in the art that the world has to offer. I think there's a real skill to developing taste. I think that's something that people overlook nowadays. Um, Developing taste in uh, the fiction, just all of the things in your life,
Mm-hmm.
um, and sitting with the discomfort that certain pieces of media bring, the questions that they raise. Um, yeah, I don't know. I do see that as sort of analogous to the discomfort of sitting at the table, and that risk that's inherent to that.
Yeah, because if God created all of reality, then if we're going to draw closer to God, it should hopefully make us more aware of reality. And so if we're shying away from these very real experiences in our art that can be disastrous, and especially if you reflect on the Old Testament, which
Mhm.
is especially good about just taking the raw humanity of its characters, taking the just very real things that happen to these people, and just openly saying it and about how corrupt and awful they are. If anything, it accentuates God's grace because you have people like Abraham, who really just make a lot of really poor decisions,
Yeah.
um, be used to be the lineage for the Christ and for God's chosen people. And like you have that somewhat in the New Testament as well, of like Peter
Mhm.
betraying Christ, and you do have these awful decisions still made. Um, but there's something about the Old Testament that's a lot more kind of narrative focused on these people. With
Yeah.
Christ and like the New Testament, it's a bit more focused on Christ. With so it's a
Mhm.
it's somewhat less about these flawed characters. But especially in the Old Testament and still in the New, you have these just people making awful choices and the
Yeah.
repercussions on their lives and everything like that.
That's funny because it also connects to some things that I've observed in growing up is, in like Sunday school, kids' church, that sort of a thing,
Yeah.
being raised with these stories from the Old Testament and having them be treated as very straightforward, sort of
Mm.
like moral lessons, moral like
Like
a
parables almost,
like an Aesop's fable kind of
Yeah.
a thing, where it's like, and David stood up to Goliath, and therefore you should stand up to hard things, like that kind of a thing. Um, Moses did what was hard, so you should also do what would, like, I don't know, this very one-to-one, don't lie or, be nice. And I don't I don't think that's the purpose of a lot of those stories in the Old Testament at all,
Yeah.
because a lot of that ends up whitewashing the biblical stories. And again, there is something to be said for nuance and age appropriate
Yeah.
matter, but um, yeah, the Old Testament is brutal and does not shy away from the real, like, moral defects of the characters that it depicts and the reality of those like shades of gray areas and the evils of the human heart at times. So I do see this sort of overarching culture that in Christianity that can push to whitewashing things, to keeping them, fluffy and soft and comfortable, but in a way that takes any bite or truth out of them. If we ignore everything that is uncomfortable, um, we're going to miss so much truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah.
Because even in the cross, we see that the ultimate good of the resurrection life of Christ being given to humanity is comes through the like ultimate tragedy of the death of Christ.
Yeah.
So it's only through the pain that we get the ultimate glory and beauty in the end.
Mhm.
Um, I think shying away from media that depicts hard things is cheating ourselves of that process of working through pain to arrive at a greater realization of beauty.
Amen to that. Um, in that case, then, could you maybe name an example or two of good Christian media that does that
Mm,
well?
mm, 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 mm.
I have a suggestion if you can't think of anything, but I want to
Go
hear what
for it.
I want. No, I want to
Yeah.
hear what you think of first,
Oh goodness.
or I can go first. Maybe that's more
I
fitting.
mean, one that comes to mind is the novel A Canticle for Leibowitz.
Okay, yeah, I've
Um,
heard the summary of that. Tell us more about that.
yeah, it might be my favorite piece of fiction. It's certainly up
Wow.
there. It's a post-apocalyptic novel set about 600 years after sort of nuclear World War III ravages the Earth, and humanity has sort of started over.
Yeah.
And it ultimately follows the story within a small monastery that's in I think the desert in like Nevada,
Sure.
Arizona kind of area, and it deals with a lot of these really interesting ideas about the church,
Mhm.
and what would carry through the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's the setting is really bleak, and yet it is a delightfully funny piece of fiction that plays a lot with different levels of irony, with sort of the audience understanding things that the characters aren't understanding.
Yeah.
Um, and I believe even games like Fallout and things like that actually took inspiration from A Canticle for
Oh, really?
Leibowitz. Yeah, sort of people misunderstanding the past, and the cycles of humanity, and it doesn't flinch away from um, the way that humanity self-destructs sometimes, and how that cycle can repeat.
Yeah, my understanding is that it kind of draws some parallels to nuclear World War III and sort of like the fall of Rome in the West, where
Yes.
you have a lot of knowledge that gets
Mhm.
put into disuse. It gets preserved in the monasteries, and then
Yep.
eventually over the centuries it begins to reemerge and affect humanity again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It also sort of deals with a really interesting idea of, as secular scholarship sort of begins to reform,
Hmm.
over 1,000 years after the disaster, um, there's this interesting tension between the church, which has maintained literacy and maintained these
Yeah.
like archives of documents when the rest of the world sort of descended into barbarism after the fallout.
Yeah.
Um, Suddenly, these secular scholars are sort of taking this knowledge that the monasteries preserved, but then also shunning the the faith of the
Yeah.
monks who maintained the knowledge. And so we see that similar sort of enlightenment
Mhm.
ideal, which the story plays out over three different sections of the book.
Yeah.
Each of the three sections are 600 years apart, which is really interesting. I would say the main character is the monastery,
Hmm.
actually. as opposed to, and there's a general main character for each of the three parts.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a terrifically interesting book that doesn't shy away from human darkness. I would also say Christian literature, or Christian media, I even take a little bit of an issue with that language,
Hmm.
um, because I believe, I mean, certainly a person doesn't need to be a Christian to be able to make something that reflects truth and beauty and
Yeah.
goodness. And that's just part of how God created humans in his image. And we can all reflect things that are true and beautiful about the world. And so even that like dichotomy of, oh, Christian, good Christian media versus uh, not good, not Christian
Yeah.
media, I'm like, there are Christians who have made terrific art, but there's also many non-Christians who have made really terrific art. And honestly, separating the meat from the bones is part of what I mean when I say that it is really valuable to
Hmm.
develop taste, to be able to sort and discern good from bad in a way, and weigh those things, holding the tensions without needing to be told specifically, here's what to think about this. It depicts suicide, so it's bad.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing.
Yeah, and so that's a canticle for Leibowitz, for those listening or watching at home who are interested. I also want to bring up The Chosen. Oh, there you go. Nice.
Yeah.
I also want to bring up The Chosen because I feel like that's a good example more recently of really high quality Christian television.
Yeah.
Where for those who have not seen The Chosen, which you definitely should, it's free to watch. I think they've done 5 out of their 7 seasons at this point. It's very much a like synthesis of the Gospels and like looking at the story of Jesus Christ. But as the name implies, it focuses primarily on the lives, especially in the earlier seasons, on the lives of the chosen disciples and those around Jesus whom he chooses. And that show does not shy away at all from human suffering, from the reality of human experience. So you'll have like Mary Magdalene really suffering from her demons. You'll have Peter and his wife going through a lot of things. And it very much just feels like a real, just like drama of the human experience, but through the lives of the apostles and the followers of Christ. And it will definitely add plenty of speculative details to the Gospels, but it always stays faithful to the Gospels and never contradicts them. It gives some potential what might have happened, but
Sure.
I very very much enjoy it. It's really good.
Yeah.
Um, well, then, speaking of good literature, tell us about Tulane and good children's literature.
Yes. Um, I think this really does connect to that idea of sort of bad Christian art versus just media literacy in general.
Yeah.
I really enjoy children's literature.
Mm-hmm.
I love reading a book aloud. I think good children's literature should also be good for adults to read. And if it's not good for adults to read, then I do a little bit question.
Okay.
And I think one of the hallmarks of good children's literature is that it doesn't necessarily shy away from darker
Hmm.
elements. I think some of the best children's literature includes some like truly heart-wrenching and difficult things. Again, there's absolutely something to consider with like age appropriateness, but children, I think, really hate being condescended to.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And so to just sort of skirt around the realities, I think doesn't do anyone any good. And so specific like my specific example for this is The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by
Okay.
Kate DiCamillo. It is I guess I'm just giving a lot of, oh, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It is beautifully written, and it really, like I have sobbed every time I have read this book,
Really. Wow.
unfailingly. Um, it deals with death and loss and heartbreak. And I can remember reading it in fourth grade and sobbing. and the value that I got from it, and it has remained one of my favorites, and it really does stand the test of time even now as an adult. Um, this book depicts truth, beauty, and goodness in all of the pain and human reality of
Yeah.
that. It's a book about uh, a China doll, a rabbit doll.
Okay.
And it's not like a Toy Story situation where he can like move or talk or anything like that. Edward is his name. Edward Tulane is a very finely made China rabbit doll
Hmm.
who is conscious and aware of the world around him,
Yeah.
but he's just a doll, and so he's a passenger. He is just an observer of the world, and he starts the book as a very self-important, self-involved,
Hmm.
self-aggrandizing, like hateful person, rabbit,
Yeah.
doll, whatever. He's owned by a little girl who loves him dearly, but all he really thinks about is how fine he looks.
Yeah.
And they're, then he at pretty early on in the book is lost and ends up on this journey where he sort of gets passed on from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really slow and beautiful progression of this rabbit doll learning to love and
Yeah.
learning to open his heart. um and that sounds, I don't know, it sounds silly in a way, and yet it's an easy read, and it is so very good. This is what I would call an excellent example of, I would call this Christian literature. I do believe Kate DiCamillo, I think she's a Christian. I don't actually know, but I think she is. But also, I wouldn't call it Christian literature in that there's
Okay.
nothing overtly, Christian in here. Although frankly, it is chock full of even scriptural allusions that
Okay.
maybe aren't like the most like clear,
Yeah.
but there's in its own way sort of depictions of crucifixion, like Edward's own journey as he's
Hmm.
learning to love. He starts, the house that he starts out living in is called, it's a house on Egypt Street,
Okay.
and he ends up being lost from the girl who loves him. He is sort of accidentally thrown overboard on a cruise ship into
Hmm.
the ocean by some, young boy or something.
Yeah.
And even that, right? He starts in Egypt and then goes through the ocean, ends up being caught in a fisherman's net. And so even
Wow.
that is like an allusion to the Exodus story of the Israelites in Egypt and going through the Red
Sure.
Sea. And he goes on this, I mean, it's in the title, this miraculous journey. Um, it's a very good book.
Can I at least ask if it's a happy or a sad ending?
I would say that it is a happy ending.
Okay.
Yes, it is a happy ending. Um, yeah,
Do you think good
it's
children's
really
literature
beautiful.
requires a happy ending?
I don't. I don't think it requires a happy ending. I'm thinking of books like, or movies like Bridge to Terabithia. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I
No.
wouldn't necessarily say that has a happy ending in that everything works out all right in the end.
Yeah.
There is resolution.
All right, and we're back. Let us continue on with our discussion. My understanding, Tanner, is that after college you have gone into Dungeons and Dragons role playing games and have stuff to say about these and make believe, so tell us more.
Yeah. Um, I growing up was always making things up. I
Yeah.
was a constantly creating things, whether that was with Legos or in my own head, telling stories. Um, I actually was a very anxious child in certain ways. I remember being like 9 years old and being utterly terrified of the idea that I would grow up and lose my imagination
Hmm.
and lose that sense of whimsy and even sort of the enchantment that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, enchantment versus disenchantment. And I can remember being very young and being terrified at that prospect, because I feel like there are several different pieces of media that represent that demonstrate this growing up of a child and leaving behind, whether that's like the Toy Story movies, or even the Velveteen Rabbit. Puff the Magic Dragon
Mm-hmm.
is a song about a boy with this toy slash imaginary dragon that when he grows up, um, Puff is left behind.
Yeah.
And I found those to be so unbelievably sad.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating when I say if I put on like a recording of Puff the Magic Dragon
Yeah.
and we sat here and listened to it, I would cry.
Wow.
To this day, it's still it affects me deeply, that those ideas.
Yeah.
um and so I remember being so scared that I was just uh it was just predetermined that I would grow up and become a boring adult with,
Mm-hmm.
no imagination whatsoever. But over time, I realized that imagination and creativity are like muscles, in that if you keep using them, they're not going to go away.
Okay.
And so I can remember being young, having had that little epiphany, and like almost going out of my way to like train my imagination and imagine things. But that led to, in seventh grade, I began um, writing things down more and like keeping a journal and a binder
Yeah.
full of these ideas that I'd have. And that was really when I would say I started world building in earnest. I
Okay.
would come up with an idea for a fantasy world like Narnia, and build from there and come up with maps and characters who would live in the world, magic systems, and just keep
Yeah.
going from there. And that is something that I've been doing in that sort of formal, like written down way since seventh grade.
Okay.
And I would say it's still one of my main pastimes today, even to this day. Um, and so I think, at least, to this point, being 27 years old, I have not yet lost that spark that I was so terrified of losing.
Good.
Um, but I would say a large way that I express it these days is in playing Dungeons and Dragons, which I only started playing, I believe it was last year. My brother, who, like I said, lives in Charlottesville,
Mm-hmm.
invited me to play Dungeons and Dragons with him and some of his coworkers, because he knew I was familiar with it through watching other people play it online,
Sure.
but I had never played myself, and that's been such a blast. We sort of wrapped up the story that we were playing last year, and have started a new one where I'm actually the sort of the the game master. I'm the
Wow.
head storyteller and referee now, which it's my first time, so it definitely is. It's challenging at times to keep track of everything, but I would say a lot of that world building effort is now spent in figuring out, okay, what is the next session going to look like, and things like that.
Well, tell us a bit about the world that you've built as a dungeon master.
Yeah. So especially since this is my first adventure that I'm running, I'm using a like an existing campaign that was created by the people who make Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And so the adventure we're playing is called The Wild Beyond the Witchlight. But I have also taken many of my own liberties, adding things, changing things. So definitely not just sort of playing it straight out of the box in a
Yeah.
way. But it's a story that is set in the Feywild, which is the Dungeons and Dragons version of the sort of Wonderland, Oz, fairy tale land,
Yeah.
um, where, of course, especially according to European folklore, fairies are not just kind fairy godmothers and Tinkerbells and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Fairies can be very tricky and even scary. Um, and things operate by a much more nursery rhyme fairy tale logic, which
Mm-hmm.
has been a lot of fun. Um, the players have to abide by the rule of hospitality, the rule of reciprocity, and the rule of narrative,
Hmm.
which are the three rules that sort of reign this Feywild land, where provided they don't offend a host, they are able to go into even the house of an enemy, provided they don't transgress any of the rules.
Well.
Reciprocity means that they need to be very careful that if somebody gives them something, they need to give something in return.
Yeah.
And narrative is encouraging the players to play into certain narrative tropes and other things like
Hmm.
that, with the idea that stories hold power. And so to invoke something like a redemption story um, is going to hold some amount of weight and power in this world. Um, which I just think all of that is exceptionally fun to play around with and think about and come up with all sorts of whimsical characters and ideas.
That hospitality one sounds really interesting because each house would have its own rules, and so
Mm-hmm.
you'd be able to kind of throw your players through a loop when there's like a different rule or a unique rule that they weren't expecting in each
Yeah.
particular house, and that just sounds like a very interesting environment for them to get to explore.
Yes, definitely.
So, what sort of character did you play in your first time doing Dungeons and Dragons when you were one of the player characters?
Yeah, I played a human bard, with a bard being a character who can tap into sort of the magic of the universe through music and poetry, which
Yeah.
I don't know. People might be able to see a few
Yeah, yeah,
connections
very
that
fitting.
why I might have connected with a bard
Yeah.
character. But the backstory of that character, his name is Lysander. Um, his background was actually that he had been kidnapped to the Feywild
Mm.
as a child,
Mhm.
and enslaved in the Feywild, and eventually was able to escape and make it back to sort of the real world, the
Yeah.
material plane. Um, but because of that, I found him an incredibly fun character to play, in that there were times when he would not make the smartest decisions or the cleverest decisions, because he is thinking in this much more sort of whimsical way.
Okay.
Um, I found him very fun to play. He wasn't what I would describe as like a protagonist type character. He was more of a secondary, like in my mind, the type of character that I wanted to play in playing Lysander was a character who'd be sort of a side character, but who would be a bit of an audience favorite if this were a piece of media. I was thinking almost in the line of like Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter, this
Sure.
very quirky, odd character who doesn't always do things that you would expect them to do, has sort of off the wall comments and things like that, while still ultimately being um, quite endearing. Ultimately, that was sort of my hope. That was very fun to play, and I mean, you can the world before I started playing Dungeons and Dragons a couple of years ago. The world that I've been most recently working on for several years now is a fairy world,
Yeah.
with some, and there are some differences between the world that I've been working on with different characters and stuff, and the world that we're the Feywild, that's Dungeons and Dragons specific, and I hybridize it some, but I am a big fan of fairy tales, folk tales, those sorts of things. I think they're incredibly valuable. I know I believe it's Tolkien has an essay called On Fairy Stories,
I'm sure he does. Yeah, he would.
which exactly,
Yeah.
which is about the value of fairy tales and storytelling and make believe for children and for adults, which ties into a lot of things.
Yeah.
I part of why I wanted to talk about Dungeons and Dragons isn't to say, oh, everyone should play Dungeons and Dragons. I definitely think it's a game that really would appeal to some people and appeal less to other people.
Yeah.
But anywhere in our lives where we can exercise more storytelling, make believe, those sorts of things, I think are wonderful. And I think reading children's literature can be a part of that. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Christian tradition of the Holy Fool?
Um, Maybe a little bit, but I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, the idea, and this mainly exists in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, but it exists somewhat in the Western stuff. But the idea is that the like fool of the village, or the person who's like kind of crazy and doing all these things, that he or she is actually probably the holiest person in the whole village. That
Mm,
like they must have some sort of like connection to God, or some sort of like way of existing more so along the logic of heaven rather than earth, if we're
mhm.
viewing them as so different. So it's drawing from like, like prophets, like Isaiah type people, drawing on like John the Baptist, stuff like that, where like the kind of crazy person doing all these things, maybe they're so focused on like these like the failure of society because society is so immoral, and that they actually
Mm,
have a stronger connection to the divine. And so it sounds like your character, and maybe in an alternative sense, more of that like
yeah.
Fey logic, is maybe
Yep.
similar to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful idea of the Holy Fool. I think that's in part really beautiful in what it says about people who like kind of the idea in some ways applied to people who are neurodivergent, who
Sure.
think differently, who don't as easily fit into society. Um, I think that's really beautiful. And I remember saying to a friend somewhat recently, like, bring, like, people should have more tolerance for being cringe. Like,
Mm.
enjoy the things you do, even
Yeah.
if other people don't really see the point in it. I definitely, growing up, um, people did not understand my mom did not understand why I would spend hours on a Google Doc making up characters and
Sure.
things like that, partially for her because she was even like, but like, what is it for?
Yeah.
Because in her mind, if I wasn't writing the next Chronicles of Narnia, like
Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't writing a book, why would I do that? What's the point? Why would I spend time doing that if there's not an objective? Um, and I thoroughly reject that. I
Yeah.
don't like that idea at all, that the things that we do need to be aimed towards, producing an end
Yeah.
result. Um, I create because I love to create. And now it's, being applied to this campaign I'm playing in Dungeons and Dragons with my
Yeah.
brother. But I even when it wasn't directed towards anything or for anyone, right? Like there's not an audience for that. People generally don't want to read through 187 pages of characters that I made up,
Yeah.
right? Like that's not the most engaging content, and it's not actually made to be. I made it because I love making it and I love thinking about it. And in some ways, it's like exercise in that the point is the journey rather than the destination. Um, but yeah, no, people don't all get it, but I think that's okay. We can all have different things that we areas where we thrive and really enjoy things.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
relate a little bit with this podcast, because this podcast is mainly for my own enjoyment, for my own joy, to catch up with friends in an interesting way. I have like maybe a few people listening to this. Shout out to my uncle Dave in Australia, but it's mainly for the joy of it, and also for the people who feature on it to
Yeah.
have a bit of a blessing to talk about stuff that they're passionate about that not everyone wants to listen to. Um, because this stuff is interesting and it should have at least some sort of space to just talk about whatever. And then continuing on with the power of story, you also had as a potential topic the Backrooms, liminal horror, and then you said you wanted to connect this to Dr. Seuss and C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
So I'm curious
Um,
about this one, Tanner.
Peter, are you familiar with the recent Backrooms movie or anything about the Backrooms?
So once the trailer for the Backrooms dropped, I watched all of the Kane Pixels lore, and I've mainly stuck to that lore. And then I
Yeah.
watched the movie twice in theaters. I liked it a lot more the second time, actually.
Hmm.
So
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't I wasn't sure. That's very cool. Okay, so you're sounds like you're on board at least on some level. You watched all the YouTube videos and then watched it
yeah, I
twice.
mean, we should definitely still give like a few sentences about what it is
Oh,
before we jump into it.
yep. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So Backrooms is actually an idea that came around sort of through an internet meme in
Mm-hmm.
some ways. I will also connect it back to some older things,
Okay.
but there was a sort of a meme that came about from 4chan, I believe,
Yeah.
that called the audience to imagine a place where if you dropped through the floor as if you were in a video game and ended up in a space where you weren't supposed to be. And this space was sort of just endless rooms that were like an empty office building with
Yeah.
flickering fluorescent lights and dingy carpet and yellowing wallpaper. And it was accompanied with a picture of that sort of a space. Um,
Yeah.
and it really caught on with certain crowds on the internet. I think people found it to be really compelling somehow
Yeah.
to imagine this space. I think people saw the photo of these sort of empty rooms, and it gave them a strange feeling of nostalgia
Mm-hmm.
combined with a feeling some people describe of like unease,
Yeah.
seeing something they aren't perhaps meant to see. The picture, the rooms do look strange in that they're completely empty. It's a place that was made for humans, made by humans, and yet there's something a bit inhuman about it to see it so empty and sort of barren. And so that idea from that meme spread around online and incubated, and different people really enjoyed, uh, world building and creating more lore and coming up with more ideas related to it.
Yeah.
And one of those people was Kane Parsons. This was during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
He was, I believe, 16 years old at the
Yep.
time, and he created a YouTube web series that used this idea as a setting, the back rooms, where it's just infinite rooms with inexplicable archaeology that no human would have built in that way.
Yeah.
Um, they're really, really well done. Uh, it looks to me, to my eyes, it looks real.
Oh yeah.
But he modeled that he did like 3D modeling on his computer and using like a VHS type filter effect over it. It's hard to tell that it's not real just
Yeah.
looking at the rooms and stuff like that. But the storytelling is, I think, really compelling. And then, recently he signed on with A24 to make a full-on movie
Yep.
entitled Backrooms, and he was the director. They gave him a ton of um, creative control and liberty, to the point where they actually built, it was some ridiculous amount of square feet
It's a
of real
giant
backroom
complex.
set,
Yeah.
like enormous,
Yeah.
which I think had another studio been handling this, I could totally imagine it having been like mostly green screen
Sure.
of like them kind of like cutting costs. But the fact that they were like, hey, tell us what you want, and he modeled on his computer what he wanted the
Hmm.
set to look like, and they just straight up built that.
Yeah,
I think that's incredible. I love what it's because it's been very successful in the box office.
very much.
I
Yeah,
love what this sort of says for the future of Hollywood, the future of indie films, the
yeah.
future. Honestly, I'm really excited to see what else Kane Parsons has up his sleeves. Because the backroom story is not over yet. I think he wants to do like a series.
Yeah, like a TV
Um,
kind of thing. Yeah.
mhm. So I'm very excited, but just it's really exciting to me.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, that I hope gives people a reasonable backstory, maybe too much backstory. But I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on the movie or the framing around it.
Yeah, I mainly have thoughts on the movie, and there'll be plenty of spoilers for people who are listening who have not seen it and who want to. So the movie, I watched it literally the day it came out with a couple of cousins of mine and my brother. And the first time around, I was like, yeah, that was a fine movie, like 7 out of 10, because the movie
Mhm.
was like sort of like unsettling to me and like wasn't a traditional 3 act structure really, and wasn't too big on everything the movie was doing. And like, yeah, it was a good, competent movie, and Kane did a good job,
Mhm.
especially given like it's A24 and more indie. But then I watched it again because a couple buddies of mine wanted to watch it. This was maybe a month later, and upon the rewatch, I think this movie is like masterful, gorgeous, because some of my favorite types of media are the ones that on a somewhat meta level take the world of the film and apply the same logic of the world to the medium that it's in, the film itself. And
Mhm.
so the Backrooms, like in the lore, is this world of like unsettlingness and uneasiness and like endless pathways and insanity and all these things.
Mhm.
And the way the movie works, there's still like, a climax and everything, but it doesn't feel and it does actually still have a 3 act structure, but it doesn't feel like the same sort of movie you would see with most movies, with like how it does that and like how it rises and falls. And then like the
Mhm.
movie itself is like pretty unsettling, and um, the characters don't they're not extremely emotionful. They're not like
Mhm.
super dramatic. Maybe would be a better word.
Yeah.
They're more sort of just like it's kind of like a just it's like the characters, the way they act in the movie, the therapist and the Clark guy, they kind of
Mhm.
just you kind of just like endlessly walking through different rooms of their minds,
Yeah.
almost of just like, and then Clark's is like a slight descent until he just eventually dies, and then the therapist is just kind of walking through the endless rooms of her mind and her memories of her childhood until eventually she breaks
Yeah.
free. But I thought the movie was just so good, consistent with the lore, of course. I love the character of the therapist, um,
Mhm.
and how the movie deals with like memory and everything. I mean, um, and trauma, and it really kind of shows the Backrooms as this place of just being remembered and remembered and remembered again, and how that impacts the human psyche and these like cognitive loops that we end up in. So the character
Yeah.
of Clark as well, he's in this cognitive loop where he believes that nothing is his fault. He's always blaming other people,
Yep.
and so he kind of endlessly walks through that loop in his own mind, right, of his own backrooms. He ends up going into the backrooms and staying there because he becomes accepted by the backrooms because he's
Mhm.
so just ingrained in this like cyclical loop. And then my
Yeah.
favorite part that I pointed out to people and they didn't realize was there's this scene in the kitchen where he's got the
Yeah.
therapist with him, and he's essentially fully delusional, and he
Mhm.
believes nothing is his fault, and she's trying to like kind of talk him out of it to like let her go because he's captured her.
Right.
She has her own moment of she realizes like I can't fix this man. I shouldn't try to fix people. That's why I got into therapy, was because my mom was crazy and I thought I could fix
Yep.
people because I couldn't fix her. She kind of gives up. She has her character moment, and then
Yeah.
he goes to untie her. And what happens is, as he's untying her, he says, "I'm sorry." And she says, "Sorry for what?" And before he can even say what he's even sorry for, the alternate version of Clark comes in and then consumes Clark and kills him.
Yeah.
And what I think that represents, and I hope it's intentional from Kane and A24, is that his Clark's whole cognitive loop in the movie is that he's unwilling to take blame. He's unwilling to say sorry. And then the
Hmm.
minute he says he's sorry, he's no longer in that loop in the back rooms. He's emerged
Yeah.
from it and he's no longer accepted by the back rooms. And then
Yeah.
that's why the like alternate version that's like the worst part of him, that part no longer vibes with him essentially and just eats him and just kills him.
Yeah.
And so it's like this tragic, like he was just starting to get out of his mental loop, but because he's been so trapped in it, it consumes him still.
Right. He is destroyed ultimately by his worst impulses that
Yeah.
he has been trapped in. Yeah, I thought it was exceptional when you know, I also certainly I grew up sort of going back to what I was saying about Christian art and things like
Yeah.
that. I grew up raised very much with the idea that horror movies are bad,
Okay.
kind of just period,
Well.
just because they're made to be scary and
Yeah.
scary things are bad. Um, yeah, that kind of an idea. And so I've watched very little. I haven't watched a lot of horror.
Yeah.
I suppose I've ended up much more in sort of internet horror
Mhm.
circles. So I've watched some I guess what would be called like analog
Yeah.
horror and other things like that online. But in terms of typical horror movies, and I've dipped my toes into different thrillers and stuff. But this was definitely the first time I saw full on horror movie like at the theaters, and I walked out being like, that was a good movie, maybe a solid three and a half out of five.
Yeah.
And as I sat with it, I was like,
Mhm.
no, that's a 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
Like, if a 5 out of 5 is like everyone needs to see this movie, this is a game changer. 4 out of 5 is that's a darn good movie.
Yeah.
That is a really good movie. And that yeah, no, as I sat with it more because it really did kind of live rent free in my head where
Yeah.
like I even now, I mean that's why we're talking about it. I'm still thinking about it. It's it's beautiful. I do love how it um tells the story sort of painted in a literal way in the back rooms, but yeah, it tells the story of trauma, of memory, of self-destruction, that I think is really beautiful. And but I know I can model, like if my parents were to watch back rooms, they would my dad would say something along the lines of, yeah, I didn't like that. I mean, it's pointless in the end. Like
I had a friend
it,
who
there's
was
no,
like that. Yeah.
it's hopeless. Like what's the point? Like there's just infinite nothing forever. And I can kind of understand where he's coming from. Um, but again, I think it's that unwillingness to sit with the uncomfortable emotions that it
Yeah.
pulls up, because the conceit of the movie is having you consider this idea of sort of an unfeeling foreign world that is incomprehensible and kind of terrified. That's because ultimately the fact that the backrooms exist sort of within this story, within this universe, says something scary about reality within
Sure.
that universe. It says that there's something beyond us that we have been unaware of, that we do not understand, that we possibly cannot understand.
Yeah.
It would seem that there's some level of intelligence behind the back rooms. Um, in that, how else does it exist? If it were truly just chaos, things, it seems to me, wouldn't flow together as smoothly as they do, wouldn't be as connected as they are. And yet there's also something in the setting of it, in the back rooms and how it reproduces things, that seems to fundamentally have this lack of understanding of humanity. um i I think it's really compelling. But I do think that on that face value, it's like, oh, how is that good or anything? But I find that super compelling. I love how it only replicates, from what we've seen, it only replicates human things.
Yeah.
There's nothing of the natural world in the back rooms,
No,
which,
you're
and
right.
there's lore wise, there's stuff that Kane Parsons has not yet revealed is
Mm-hmm.
as to I mean, he's communicated that he has answers to a lot of these questions
Yeah.
of sort of where does this come from? Why is this happening? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think people have been theorizing, people can theorize, and I certainly don't claim to know like, oh, this is what that means. But yeah, I
I think that the Backrooms for Gen Z is kind of our Lovecraftian horror.
yeah.
Of it's like this cosmic thing that's like kind of intelligent, but ultimately like something you cannot understand or comprehend, and it's just like
Mm-hmm.
massive and cosmic. And it
Yeah.
does reflect our time well because like Lovecraft, his stuff is a lot more, frankly, like xenophobic and like these like
Yeah.
other things coming in, into our world, and
Right.
that's bad. Whereas for us, with the Backrooms being and like liminal horror being this
Mm-hmm.
like very Gen Z, like American, like suburban type of
It's what we
horror, it's
know.
much more about like because like as modern day like Americans and Gen Z and suburbia, like we are like in a good place and we're not so much afraid of other people coming in, but we're worried about ourselves being misunderstood. And the
Mm-hmm.
Backrooms is about place and about being
Yeah.
misunderstood and like misinterpreted by the Backrooms.
Having a place and also not having a place,
Yeah,
right? Because the idea of a liminal space is that liminal spaces are transitional spaces.
yeah,
So, like spaces that you don't go to be there,
like a
spaces that
hallway.
are instrumental, a
Yeah,
hallway, an airport,
yeah,
um, things like that, that
like
are the
the
in
mall,
between
like the inside
spaces,
of the
the mall.
mall. Yeah,
Hmm. In between spaces. And so, in a way, the backrooms sort of demonstrate this placelessness of, we desire to have a place, we desire to have it built up to keep us safe, to have it give us some meaning.
yeah,
Um, and yet the back rooms are this placeless place where nothing does seem to have meaning, where everything seems to be a bit transitional. There's no safety amidst it's. I haven't read much of Kafka. I probably should.
hmm
It feels though in a way
it's
Kafka-esque
very
in the idea
Kafka-esque. Yeah,
of yeah, this incomprehensible system that is familiar to us in that it's the bureaucracy, the whatever, the
yeah,
suburbia of it all, um, that ends up alienating us
yeah.
so completely. um, yeah, I find it so compelling,
And
and really
then
beautiful, and I'm super excited about what the future holds, both with Kane and sort of the broader movement of this.
yes, me too, for sure. And then, but I'm also confused. How does the Backrooms relate to Dr. Seuss and C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I I think it's very easy, or like I've heard a lot about this like liminal space, liminal horror, backrooms,
Yeah,
and how it's this very Gen Z, and I think it does really resonate with Gen Z, maybe more than with other
sure.
generations. But I also am not fully on that train that it's exclusive to us, or even that this liminal stuff is new, or like a new
Yeah,
phenomenon. And of course, yeah, there's some Dr. Seuss art, partially just in his like existing books, but there's some art that I believe it's called like the secret art of Dr. Seuss or something like that.
okay.
That depicts, he draws these very a lot of like very grand structures, and I can think of pages in Oh, the Places You'll Go,
Yeah, I was thinking that
where
book too.
it's like creepy and
Yeah. Yeah.
empty. And I'm like, that's backrooms. Like
Yeah, you're right.
Seuss draws inexplicable, incomprehensible architecture that doesn't make any sense, that doesn't seem to serve any purpose. And so, in the Lorax, you look at the Oncer's house, it's this crooked,
Yes, yeah.
weird structure that doesn't make any sense. And I look at that and I'm like, that's liminal horror. Like but it's both weirdly nostalgic and comforting, and I think that's part of the
Hmm.
draw, is that people do find these spaces compelling in a way, but also like alienating in a way.
And who's
That
that
at least is
artist
part of
that
the draw.
draws the like endless staircase, or like the staircases that don't make sense, and it's like
Escher, I
Escher.
think.
It's also kind of Escher, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There's also this comes up in various discussions, and I haven't finished reading it yet. I like started and then like just haven't had the time, and it's a little bit
Yeah.
tough to read. Have you heard of the book House of Leaves?
Nope.
So it was written around 2000.
Yeah.
It's a large book. It's kind of a cult classic in a way. It A lot of people mention it when talking about Backrooms and stuff like that,
Okay.
because I think it's honestly Backrooms before the Backrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's in its own. I think people call it new weird in terms of like an artistic movement, new weird.
Okay.
Um, and it's like a story inside a story inside a story, sort of. So in that way, kind of Arabian Nights, like weird meta.
Yeah.
Um, but the base story is of this guy who finds a room in his house that he wasn't previously aware of.
Okay.
And when he measures the space, the inside of his house is 1 inch larger than the exterior of his house when you measure across
Okay.
it, which should not by any means be possible.
Yeah.
And then I haven't really gotten further than that, but I believe he ends up finding there's a lot more
Like a
inside,
complex,
and
yeah.
a whole complex.
Yeah.
And I think it ends in tragedy or awful stuff, but it's a very weird book in terms of it plays a lot with um, formatting, kind of, where like some pages are more like blank or have very few words on them.
Mm-hmm.
There's different like it. There's a glossary at the end that like tries to like maybe make sense of things. So it's a little bit of
Wow.
some almost puzzle solving, I think. But again, I haven't read much beyond the beginning, but
Yeah.
have really enjoyed, like, it really got me thinking. And I know that I want to read this, partially because I think there's more to be said about horror and liminal horror and these things. And I'm not yet sure fully what I have to say about it, but I think there's something there. The other connection I have to make was to C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
which is what I would point to as like, this isn't a brand new phenomenon. Not that C.S. Lewis is the most, way
Sure.
back old times, but I mean, he definitely belonged to a completely different sort of generation
Yeah.
to the one that we have today. Um, I One of my favorite Narnia books is The Magician's Nephew,
Okay. And that's the one
and
that
I
Greta Gerwig's making a movie of, right?
it is,
Yep.
yes. I'm excited to see what she does with it. But I can remember being 7 years old, having my dad read that to me, and it evokes this creeping dread, this strange familiarity.
Hmm.
It evokes what the Backrooms evoke for me.
Okay.
Um, and it did even back then. And in my mind, that's part of what, like, I think C.S. Lewis wrote it with some of those ideas in
Hmm.
mind. Specifically, the magician's nephew gives some of the origin story to Narnia,
Yeah.
but before the two protagonist kids end up in Narnia, they are using some magic rings and they end up in this other world that is a desolate world. It's called Charn, and it's ultimately where the White Witch Jadis actually originates from.
Okay.
It gives sort of her origin in some ways, but they show up and it's this massive, sprawling stone city
Hmm.
that is in utter disrepair.
Yeah.
And it's enormous, and there's arches and building, like it's just this crazy labyrinth of building, and yet there's not a living thing in it, not
Hmm.
even a living plant.
Yeah.
It's a dead world, and the sun is described as giant and red in the sky, as if even the sun of that world is dying.
Wow.
um, and they end up finding this hall with these statues in it. They end up ringing the bell, which says basically like "do not ring" kind of thing,
Yeah.
and it awakens the last statue, which is the last queen, the last empress of Charn,
Yeah.
Jadis, who becomes the White Witch. And it's revealed that it's sort of a metaphor for uh, nuclear arms, like
Okay.
weapons of mass destruction.
Sure.
Um, she was in mutually assured destruction with other people in her world, but to maintain her power, she ended up speaking what's called the deplorable word, which is this forbidden magic that apparently killed every living being but her
Well,
in the entire world. But even that, they also the two kids who are the protagonists end up finding the magic rings by crawling through a crawl space in the attic to get into a locked room that they had never been inside before in their house. And so to me, all of this has been very captivating to me since I was
yeah.
very young.
Well,
And it's it all gets at it evokes the same vibe. There's also a wood between the worlds, which is endless forest with endless pools of water, and different pools of
hmm.
water can transport you to Earth,
That
to
feels very
Narnia, to
Backrooms. Yeah.
Charm. It's so Backrooms, and
Yeah.
like I just feel like I haven't really heard people talk about that, but it's again, I don't know if I have anything particularly deep to say about it, but I think it's very interesting and it definitely captures me in a way that I
Yeah.
find really appealing.
It's also the same logic of the wardrobe, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, space.
Absolutely, right? They were playing hide and seek in this mansion, even that, this like
Sure.
weird mansion that they
Yeah.
don't know with weird rooms that they don't know
Yeah.
and wardrobe and yeah, you hide in the wardrobe and yeah, it keeps going back. Absolutely. I think Lewis was tapped into that.
Yeah.
Um yeah, I don't know, there's something there.
It is really cool, and I am also, yeah, very excited to see what Gerwig does, especially because it's a bit of a
Definitely.
departure from her previous three movies in like
Yeah.
subject matter, or maybe she'll make it more Gerwig-esque. But for our final topic, I want to talk about snail mail and postage stamps. So go for it,
Yes.
Tanner.
I am a firm believer. I mean, we talked about embodiment earlier and the
Sure.
goodness of embodiment
Yeah.
and embodied practices like, removing the arrows of a pomegranate. Um, Snail mail, writing a loved one a card and sending it in the mail. I think there's something so deeply embodied about that. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful. I think it's something that we don't do. I know for a long time I wanted to be the type of person who writes people cards,
Yeah.
and then but that just kind of felt a little bit paralyzing because it felt like a lot.
Hmm.
And I had these beautiful cards and I had some postage stamps, but I'm
Yeah.
like, but they're for a special occasion. I firmly believe um like this idea of save or savor. In terms of this dilemma of save or savor,
Hmm.
I think we should be savoring things. I'm
Sure.
the type of person
Yeah.
who wants to, oh, but no, that's special chocolate that my mom brought from Switzerland, so we'll save it for a special occasion. And it's like that's just going to result in weird like bloomed chocolate. Or it's like, no, this is the specialty. Your tea's
Yeah.
going to get
Yeah.
stale. Like
Hmm.
enjoy the things that you have. God has given us many good gifts.
Yeah.
And so the same way with snail mail, I have now a bunch of different cards and stuff. Um, don't hang on to it. Also, the card that you write doesn't need to be some deep, profound thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can just say, yesterday I saw the Backrooms movie. It was pretty good. Today I bought watermelon at Kroger and it was also good.
Yeah.
Thinking of you, love you, Tanner. And then you put it in an envelope, you stick a stamp on it, and you send it. I I love the USPS, which is apparently a little bit of a hot take. I think people maybe don't love the like shipping times and stuff like that. I
Okay.
think the USPS is great. I love the postage stamps that they design. I have ended up actually owning a lot. I think I
Are
last
you
time I
full
counted,
on
I had
stamp collecting at this point?
okay, what's really interesting is I would not call myself a stamp collector because stamp collectors collect stamps to collect stamps. I buy stamps to use them.
Sure.
Stamp collectors don't use their stamps.
Yeah.
I buy even vintage stamps
Mm-hmm.
that have never been used, mint condition vintage stamps, and I use them, which felt a little sacrilegious at first. And I'm sure some people would be like, "What?"
Yeah. Yeah.
But for the one thing, the ones that I can afford to buy are not the like super rare,
Sure.
valuable
Sure.
ones. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, at first I felt guilty for like using up the stamp, but then I'm thinking, what was the stamp made for? What was it
Yeah.
made to do? What is the telos of this stamp?
Yeah.
The telos of its postage stamp is to be used to send mail.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a way, I kind of find it sadder, the idea of a mint condition postage stamp sitting in a book, never being touched again.
Yeah.
Not that I think that's actually wrong, but just for me, that's how I've been like, no, this is a good thing.
You want to savor the
Um,
stamp. You don't want to save it.
exactly. It's that
Yeah.
same idea. So I own, I think last time I counted was like over 400 different stamps.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
maybe not different stamps, over 400 stamps.
Yeah.
It might be well more than that though.
Okay.
But I love making little almost like stamp collages on
Okay.
people's mail, um, with the different stamps that I have, that I try to make them like relevant to the people, in some ways that I'm sending it to. But there are just some really cool postage stamps, even if you're not getting vintage ones, like ones they currently sell. There's Dungeons and Dragons stamps
Oh,
that have
really?
some really cool stuff on
Wow.
them. Recently, they came out with Mr. Rogers stamps,
Nice.
which are super fun.
Yeah.
I, being a biologist, really liked these. There's a series they did called Life Magnified, which is like all these different like pictures from a microscope of different
Hmm.
things like red blood cells and neurons and stuff like that. But there are countless different beautiful stamps. They're like wonderfully designed. These are just the 2026 sunflower stamps.
Okay.
But I just wanted to encourage people, hey, um, write letters to people. It's so fun to get a letter from someone and to open it,
Yeah.
because so much of it's just junk mail. But then you're like, oh, this is handwritten with a pretty
Yeah.
stamp on it. And there's Goodnight Moon stamps. I like those. Those are really cute. And it's just a delight. I think it's a delight, and I think more people should be doing it. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to say about it, but yeah, I'm a big fan.
I always feel really special in seeing when I get a handwritten, even just postcard in the mail. You know.
Yeah, totally, totally. So, yeah, and it's not the cheapest. Then again, it's also not the most expensive thing. There are much more expensive
Yeah.
hobbies out there.
For sure.
But I think at this point, a sheet of stamps like the sunflower ones I said go for about $15 at the post office, which
Okay.
again, not the cheapest. I actually highly recommend checking out USPS.com, where you
Okay.
can buy them online,
Sure.
because shipping is free, because it's the USPS.
Yeah. There.
They mail it to
Yeah.
you, like it's kind of what they do.
Yeah.
But usually, like if you go to the post office, they might only have a small selection of what's
Mm.
actually available.
Mm-hmm.
If you check it out on USPS.com, you can see the full selection. Also, one thing that I highly recommend that you can't find as often, there are these low denomination stamps. So these are 2-cent stamps,
Yeah.
which means typically to send a letter, you need a forever stamp. That forever stamp just means that it's enough postage to mail a standard envelope, a
Yeah.
standard card. So I always put a forever stamp in the upper corner, but then I'll add other stamps that are usually lower denomination. So these are worth 2 cents each. And
Yeah.
for a sheet of 20 of them, it cost 40 cents.
Yeah.
40 cents for the full sheet. And I buy these on USPS.com. And so I probably bought like 10 sheets
Yeah.
for like what, $4.
Yeah.
And then they're really beautiful. These ones are daffodils, but they have other flowers, and
Hmm.
they have fruit, and they have other cool small denominations. So I just think it's fun to make
Yeah.
something beautiful and to send it to people.
Well, that is delightful and a
Yeah.
blessing.
Yeah.
Well, then let's finish off with concluding with some life advice, which I forgot to have the guest do last episode. I apologize for that. But Tanner, give us one piece of life advice.
Yeah. My advice is, you are not a generous person if you can't receive generosity.
Hmm.
And I don't know, that sometimes has rubbed people the wrong way, but generosity is a two-way street.
Yeah.
I think many people that I'm friends with find it easier to give than to receive, which
I do
giving
for
is
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Again, we know that giving is good. You should be generous. You should be giving, especially as Christians. That
Yeah.
is something that we are called to do. But also, it is important to recognize that receiving other people's generosity is what sort of enables them to be generous. And even in receiving, you are giving them the gift of allowing them to be
Hmm.
generous. Um, other like asking for help. I think there's something you were talking about the atomization. I think we don't want to inconvenience people.
Yeah.
We don't sometimes getting help from someone else is also a little bit inconvenient for us. Like we were talking about dinner parties versus cocktail parties. So I really think that I need to work on it, but I think we can all work on being more generous, which includes being willing to accept other people's gifts and generosity, which can mean laying down our pride, laying down
Yeah.
other things like that.
Hmm.
I do think I word it in a way that kind of like maybe prickles people a little bit just because it's this, are you a generous person or are you not it's
Sure.
not that serious, but it's like if you can't accept generosity, I absolutely do believe that you're not generous, like
Yeah.
definitionally.
Wow.
So that's my advice. Be generous and and in that generosity, be open to receiving gifts from people.
That definitely hits hard for me, and it could definitely hit hard for, especially many other people of faith, where it's like we're supposed to always sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice, and it's true.
Yeah.
But if you're not letting other people sacrifice, then it is a two-way street, and that's just human love, is wanting the
Yeah.
best for each person.
It's also
And so
good
you
to
do need
enjoy
to be able to be
things.
receptive. Yeah. So.
That's part of the embodiment thing. And a big part of the Supper of the Lamb, he's like, it's good to enjoy food. It's good
Mm-hmm.
to enjoy people. It's
Yeah.
good to enjoy life and embodiment. God made these things, and they're not, he didn't make them because they're necessary. He made them because they're good.
Amen.
So, yeah.
And with that, we've come full circle. Thank you so much, Tanner,
Of
for being willing to come
course.
on to this podcast. It's been a great gift that I'm receiving, that you've given us your presence and conversation. You can find more episodes of A Deck of All Jacks on YouTube and Spotify. Check us out on there. New episodes are released every Tuesday. I mean, truthfully, more so like Monday evening. This should be episode 5, I believe, which I'm excited about. And thank you very much for listening and or watching. And we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.